and welcome to the election show on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Greer. I'm an associate professor of political science at Fordham University and the co-host of FAQ NYC, a New York-centered podcast. Joining me today via Zoom, as always, are Matt McDermott, communication strategist and vice president of Whitman Insight. Whitman Insight Strategies. I'm supposed to write this down. And also with me, political analyst and professor of political science at Columbia University, Lincoln Mitchell. How are you all? Good morning.
Doing well. Good to be with you.
I'm so glad everyone's safe and sound. Okay, let's jump right in. So we've seen the president a little frazzled this week. He's getting a little stressed out at the fact that it doesn't seem as though the coronavirus numbers are going down. And we have Joe Biden, who's still trying to run a campaign from his basement. So let's start there. We know that the House is trying to push through another spending bill that could possibly top $3 trillion. What effect do you all think that will have on the election?
The House is trying to push through a spending bill, but then it's got to get through the Senate and the president has to sign it into law. So, the question is, what is this effort going to have on the election? And the answer there is that the pandemic has caused a massive economic disruption in the United States. And the question of which or can either party react to that appropriately? And so far, the answer is kind of. But as the months go on, and as the Republicans call to reopen the economy, which is frankly a not very thought through kind of childlike approach to this, as if you're playing a game of freeze tag and you snap your fingers and everything goes back to normal. But they're going to keep saying that the economy can't be reopened because people don't believe they're safe going out there. And what that does is it raises the need to have a very comprehensive economic program. The Democrats may not be able to pass this, but it will help them, but at least they seem to understand this. Whereas the Republican policy, which seems to be just to make sure that the rich people don't get hurt too badly, I'm not sure that that's really a good economic platform during what will be a massive recession as we go towards November.
Matt, I mean, this seems like essentially the Democratic wish list for the liberals. What do you, like, in response to Lincoln, how is this going to work and will it work at all?
To me, the president's strategy over the last week or two is really, frankly, strange from a political perspective. I think he, in the early days of this crisis, smartly realized that there needed to be massive economic stimulus from the federal government to, in some way, buoy this economy through this situation. And so we had a series of economic stimulus plans that were passed, including the $1,200 stimulus that went out to individual Americans over the last month or so, in partnership with Democrats in the House who got that passed. It's frankly baffling to see this administration now step back and say, we've basically done all we need to do from a stimulus perspective. And if Democrats want to go ahead and pass an additional package, that's well and good, but we're not going to be there to support it and sign it into law. When just a few days ago, we had the first unemployment numbers coming out during this crisis of 15% of the country unemployed. I think most of us expect that to go up to 20% or more. 30 million Americans are out of work at the moment, and there's no clear sign of when they'll be able to go back into work. And so obviously there needs to be another round of stimulus, and it's frankly odd that the president is refusing to get behind this package, given that if the economy doesn't rebound in the way that most people assume it hopefully will, elected in November, his fortunes in this election are tied to the federal government buoying this economy. And if they don't have any interest in doing that, I can only see it hurting his reelection chances. It's really an odd strategy that they've taken over the last week. After having a series of stimulus packages go through a month or two ago.
Right. Well, we know that his base will not move away from him no matter what their financial circumstances are. I mean, which is pretty fascinating. So, Matt, let me stick with you, though. I mean, is it curious to you that Joe Biden isn't sort of doing much better? I mean, I know that we're in such a unique situation where you can't really campaign and touch voters and travel across the country. But it doesn't seem as though the president's poll numbers are sort of in the tank. What can you make of this disconnect between sort of what the reality is, the fact that we're sheltering in place, the fact that we have over 80,000 Americans dead, to say nothing of all the others who are sick and don't have health insurance? Why aren't we seeing Joe Biden as, I mean, essentially an obvious choice for the vast majority of Americans?
Look, I mean, we live in a partisan society at the moment. And we're seeing that play out in real time, where a president of a political party can tank an economy, can fail to lead in a world in which we've now had 80,000 or more Americans die in the past 8 weeks, and still get 40, 42, 43% of the vote. That is just the partisan reality we live in right now. And so regardless of what happened up till now, and frankly what happens through November, this will be a close election. And so I think what Joe Biden needs to do is two things that, you know, we've talked about pretty repeatedly. One is shore up his base among Democrats and ensure that we have the structures in place that get them to the polls come this November, and ensure that states are implementing policies to get people to their ballot come November. And the other is to persuade independent voters, many of whom supported Donald Trump in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, that was a bad strategy, that over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen the effects of Donald Trump winning this election, and we can't have another 4 years of that. And to that end, you know, to your point, he is challenged by the fact that he can't go out on the stump and make that case to voters. On the flip side, I think they've done the best they can possibly do in this situation. They've moved a lot of their apparatus online. They've been having significant engagement over digital channels, getting tens of millions of views on the videos they've been putting out, in contrast to Donald Trump. I think they're doing all they can at the moment. And so while it's a tight race and it'll continue to be a tight race, it was always going to be a tight race in this sort of partisan political environment, regardless of the situation that we currently find ourselves in.
Right. Lincoln, do you agree with Matt that Biden's doing essentially the best he can under these circumstances? And what else could he do to sort of make sure that Democrats are excited and motivated and aware of all the different issues that they need to?
One way we have to think about this: Joe Biden is not the most inspiring, exciting, charismatic, dynamic politician around. And we have to be able to recognize that without seeming like we're, you know, some apologists for Donald Trump. I don't think of myself as that, but we have to recognize that part of the reason those numbers aren't what they are is that Joe Biden is not the most exciting candidate in the world. He is the guy who's not Donald Trump, and that may very well be and probably will be enough to get him over the hump. But it's why you're not seeing those numbers broaden more. The other thing I would say is that Matt said this was always going to be a close race, and I tend to agree with that. However, this pandemic and the economic downturn that has come along with the pandemic was entirely avoidable. And you didn't, in the United States, and you didn't, or the effect of it, and you don't need to be a brilliant politician to do that. When the virus began to hit, when we began to learn about it in January, any president, Democrat or Republican, should have known exactly what to do, which is you go in front of the public and you make thoughtful, inspiring speeches. You express sympathy with those who have lost friends and loved ones, and you turn it over to the health professionals. And if Donald Trump had done that, we'd be looking at a slight downturn of the economy. And look, I'm not an expert, but I would say 15 to 20,000 deaths at most. And we'd be moving, and the economy would be recovering, as is the case in many countries around the world. Now, what this means is that, now to go back to your initial question, implicit in Donald Trump's messaging now is what Donald Trump is telling the American people is, hey, we did a great job. This could have been a lot worse. Well, empirically speaking, that's not true. But there certainly are arguments that he has made that have resonated with people. You know, that he has said things, the initial estimates were 250,000. Now we're only at 80,000. I don't like that you say only at 80,000, right? 80,000 is a lot. And I suspect by the time voters vote in November, we'll be closer to 250. But his strategy now is to campaign and saying, one, the pandemic didn't kill as people as we thought. And two, any downturn in the economy It's not my fault, it's the pandemic's fault, and therefore probably China's fault. And, you know, about 40 to 45% of the people believe that.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that, you know, Joe Biden has a long road ahead of him, obviously, because the president has the bully pulpit and can make these arguments on a daily basis and move the goalposts. I've been debating with quite a few of my friends and colleagues about a Biden strategy to combat what you just said, Lincoln. And so I'm curious to know what you all think. How much do you think Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate will make, how much of a difference will it make in this particular election? In the past, the vice presidential choice hasn't added so much to the ticket, right? People definitely vote at the top of the ticket. But because of the unique circumstance we're in with the pandemic, because of Joe Biden's advanced age, do you all think that this may be an opportunity for Democrats to essentially make the argument that we're giving you two capable people as opposed to just one incompetent president in Donald Trump? Lincoln, I'll let you follow up with your thoughts on that.
Well, in recent history, we have seen, I think we have seen two nominees for a major party choose a running mate who was wildly unqualified for the job, right? So I'm thinking of Sarah Palin in 2008, and if I could date myself a little bit, Dan Quayle in 1988, right? Both of those people, there was kind of a consensus they weren't prepared for the job. In both cases, their running mates, the person at the top of the ticket was, and one won, Bush in 88, Bush Senior, and one lost, McCain in 2008. What this, and then for the most part, you know, Lloyd Bentsen in 1988, Jack Kemp in 1986, these are all kind of, you know, insider politics types who've been around forever, who are very competent. Joe Biden in 2008, Tim Kaine in 2016 also fit that description. So my sense is that within the universe of people that it appears Joe Biden is looking at, as long as they check that box of they're a reasonably competent person who is not either way too out there ideologically or has some, you know, horrific skeletons in their closet or is just totally unqualified, it doesn't really matter. So we might say maybe it's Gretchen Whitmer, maybe it's Kamala Harris, maybe it's Amy Klobuchar, and who knows who it's going to be. But within that universe of those kinds of people, I don't think it matters very much. If he goes way outside of that and picks someone, and it's hard to imagine Joe Biden, who is essentially in his temperament a conservative, careful person, picking someone way out of left field who has no experience, who just like impressed him one night on a television show, which is largely how Bush got to Quayle, and God only knows how McCain got to Palin. If he doesn't make that kind of a mistake, you know, the focus is going to be on Biden.
Right. Matt, what do you think?
That's right. This election will be a referendum on Donald Trump. There is no person in this country who's going to be standing there on election day thinking to themselves, man, I don't really have an opinion on Donald Trump and I don't have an opinion on Joe Biden. But that vice presidential pick, that's what decided it for me. That is not how people will decide their perspective on this election. And so I agree with Lincoln. I think any of the candidates that have been discussed for Joe Biden as potential vice presidential considerations make sense. I think all of them are qualified for the role. I think all of them, to your point, Christina, would add an element of energy to the ticket. I think welcome energy, but I don't think any one decision over another has a particular impact on this race, because at the end of the day, voters will be deciding this election as a referendum on Donald Trump. And they'll either decide come November, they are satisfied with his leadership over the past 4 years. They are satisfied with over 100,000 dead under his watch. They are satisfied with an unemployment rate of 20%. They're satisfied with tens of millions of people out of work, or they're ready to try something new. And that will be the referendum on this election, regardless of who the number two on the Democratic side is.
So, I mean, Matt, following that thought, I mean, you know, I talk to a lot of young people as a professor, and sadly, you know, because so many young people supported Bernie Sanders and he is not the presumptive nominee, unfortunately, this narrative amongst not all, but many of the young people that I teach and communicate with is that, oh, well, you know, Joe Biden and Donald Trump represent relatively the same ideas and there won't be any progressive policies. How should Joe Biden really reach out to those young people who are registered voters or possibly this is their first presidential election that they could vote in, and really help them? I mean, for me, obviously, I'm like, that's clearly not the case, and I try and walk them through it. But how does Joe Biden do that as a candidate on social media to help them, see that these are false equivalencies, and he is obviously nowhere near a Donald Trump presidency?
Yeah, let me say two things. One, as someone who luckily still falls into that age cohort, I too am, a millennial voter in America today who certainly did not support Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee. But the idea that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are one and the same person is complete nonsense. Joe Biden is running a policy agenda right now that is the most progressive in American history. It's far to the left of what Hillary Clinton ran on in 2016. It's far to the left of what Barack Obama ran on in 2008 and 2012. This idea that Joe Biden is running some sort of right-wing campaign and masking himself as a Democrat in disguise is nonsense. It is an incredibly progressive agenda. And what I think needs to happen, and you're already seeing it come true this week, is bringing voices and leaders of that wing into the fold. You saw the Biden campaign announce this week that he's putting together policy leadership committees, including on issues like climate change, including on issues of criminal justice reform, including on issues of economic reform and healthcare reform, all of which have leaders of the progressive movement in them, from AOC to members of the Sunrise Movement to other progressives that have run national campaigns. He is bringing those voices into the fold and showing those voters that their voice matters and their voice will be at the table when he's elected and when he's making these policy decisions. So I think more than anything else is what the Biden campaign needs to do to reflect on the importance of these voters and reflect on what they want to get out of a policy agenda of the next administration and their opportunity to get that out of a Biden presidency. But again, this idea that Joe Biden, or frankly any person Democrats would have chosen as their presidential nominee, is akin to Donald Trump is just insane. And the more people think that, the more we start to repeat a lot of the mistakes that we've made over the last 2 years. And we ignore the fact that we have the opportunity to elect the most progressive candidate in American history this November.
Right. Lincoln, what do you think the Biden strategy should be with young people explicitly to sort of combat this false narrative that Biden and Trump are essentially one and the same?
Well, first, I want to underscore something, and I think I'm certainly not in the millennial. I'm in the Generation X. Right? I'm kind of too old, too young to be a boomer, too young to be a millennial. We're the people everyone forgets about. But having said that, I want to underscore something Matt said. Biden's platform is very progressive by the standards of the modern or even not modern Democratic Party. Joe Biden has ran for president twice in the past. In either case, he would have been laughed off stage left for the things he's saying now. That is how far the Democratic Party has moved to the left, and it has dragged Joe Biden along with him. Now, a lecture about that from a political science professor is unlikely to move a young voter. So I'm going to pose a couple of other things. One, even if you think there's a tiny bit of difference, and only a tiny bit of difference between them, I think young people can be terrified by the prospect of another term for Donald Trump. I'm sheltered in place right now with 2 young people, and they are terrified of that. And they don't love Biden for a lot of the reasons that their generation don't love Biden, but they understand how bad that would be. Secondly, for all progressives, it is, if Biden wins, which is likely, not a given, but likely, he's got a real shot, it is much better for progressives to have been part of that victory so that they can go to Biden through their leaders and say, look, we helped make this happen. We want to take a strong stand on climate change. We want to be very good on LGBT equality, whatever the issues are that are important, rather than Biden looking at them and saying, hey, I won without you, so pick a number, we'll get to you when we have a chance. And the third thing I would suggest to the Biden campaign, and this is really to the Democratic Party more generally, is a lot of younger and more progressive voters can get excited by down ballot races, right? So if you live in, for example, Colorado, John Hickenlooper running for the Senate, again, no radical, but a very important race. If you live in Maine, the idea of getting Susan Collins out of the Senate, and that goes all the way down to congressional races. I talked to a very progressive, exciting school board candidate in Orange County the other day, and hopefully they can bring out voters and say, while you're getting excited about this progressive local candidate, just stay on the whole line. And that requires coordination, but that seems very doable in an election.
I think that the point about down ballot races is really important just because, unfortunately, sometimes they get overshadowed by a presidential election year because of all the attention's given to the top of the ticket. We've got some really exciting Senate races, thinking of Georgia explicitly. We've got some governor's races across the country where we've obviously seen the importance of a strong executive on the state level. So I think your point is well taken, Lincoln. Now, here's the thing. Part of getting those people excited and building coalitions and fundraising coalitions and just connections and communication strategies sometimes happens at the convention during a presidential year. It's looking like we're moving to a fully virtual convention. Both of you, Lincoln, I'll start with you. Walk us through what that means for Democrats to sort of not be able to physically gather and really build a sort of cohesive policy narrative. And we know that the convention is a lot of pomp and circumstance, but for a lot of lower level candidates, it's really a great opportunity for them to meet so many different types of Democrats to help them form stronger coalitions. So Lincoln, moving virtually, what do you think that means for the Democratic Party, not just in 2020, but moving forward?
Right. To some extent, the relationships you might build had we had one at a real life 2020 Democratic convention might begin to pay off around 2028 or 2030 because they're younger candidates who don't know that senator from the neighboring state or something like that. So that's not going to be able to happen. On the other hand, most people today understand how to network online. They understand how to build those relationships. If you're running for Congress in Nebraska and you want to get to, the Attorney General, if it's the same party, I don't even know, in Iowa or something like that, people know how to do that. So I'm not so worried about that. I watch the conventions every 4 years, and I always ask myself, why are we doing this? What is the point? Not because some of that nuts and bolts stuff behind the scenes isn't important, but that could stay behind the scenes. And you could have done that in a pre-pandemic era, just in a conference somewhere with a few people, with the insiders. The public side of it, I don't think that's a big loss at all. We know how to put speeches on the internet. We know how to use the technology to do that. What effect that will have doing it this way rather than live, I don't think it's a big deal. I think it does send the right message. Part of the problem around the pandemic is when some people in different sets of rules apply. So Donald Trump recently said, essentially, don't worry, we get tested all the time in the White House. My initial thought, and I'm sure many Americans, was I'm very worried because I can't get tested, right? And the people in my community can't get tested. I see this with professional sports, proposing we're going to get, all the ball players of whatever sport you're talking about regularly tested. And I don't want any athletes or anyone else to get sick. But, if testing is going to be something that we ration, let's not give it maybe to the politicians first. So I think it's a statement that they're taking the pandemic seriously. It will make the convention ultimately perhaps a little less interesting if that's possible. But also what do you do in 2024, right? Where's the energy to have another convention? So this year might be the end of a lot of things, including the Iowa caucus and the political conventions, neither of which in my view would be a tragedy.
Right. Especially, I think the Iowa caucus brings up a lot of questions for sure. Matt, what do you think? I've always sort of thought of it as the choice of, going to City Hall to get married versus having a massive wedding, right? Both of them result, in the same sort of, in the same results and the same ending, but it's the process which is different, which is bringing people together in a huge, expensive way to commune, or it's just between sort of, two folks and we keep it moving. So what do you think about this idea that the convention will be virtual?
And it's a great discussion to have because what you pose as a challenge wherein we can't get all of these grassroots people together in one place, I actually see as an opportunity for the party in which, you're right, in a typical presidential environment, we at one time in August or September each year, bring tens of thousands of people who should be organizing in their community on a plane to some foreign destination in Philadelphia or Milwaukee or Cincinnati, and are taking them out of their communities at a time when they should be building it up ahead of the election. I think in this sort of environment, it's actually opportune to have those people remaining in their communities, building out those networks, building out the organizations they'll need at the local level to get out the vote come November, and not have them all sitting in a convention hall 1,000 miles away. I actually think that's a good thing for the party. I think between that and the fact that it forces us as a party apparatus to move a lot of things online, which we've been avoiding for a long time now. I think both of those are great. I think it modernizes the party at the end of the day. It moves a lot of different operational things online. And it also keeps people where they're best suited, which is in their local communities, talking to voters they know about the importance of this election.
Just, because we always like to make predictions on this show, do you all think that the Republicans will go ahead with their convention and the Democrats will cancel theirs? Matt, I'll start with you.
Oh, tough. This is a tougher prediction than the election, I think, at this moment.
Right.
I
like to gamble early in the morning. Go ahead.
I think Democrats, in the sake of public health, will choose to hold a remote convention. That seems pretty obvious at this point. What that looks like remains to be seen. I still suspect there'll be some sort of, public speeches and things like that that are, of course, televised, but we won't be cramming 10,000 people into a convention hall. I suspect Republicans get to the same sort of decision-making point. It's hard for me to imagine Republicans moving ahead in this sort of environment with a convention, recognizing that there'll be no world in which they can do that without everyone wearing masks. And it seems odd to me as a political decision for Republicans to put 15,000 Republican activists in a convention hall together, all wearing masks, to remind the American people about the calamity that their president just led America through. Odd strategy for me. If they want to do that, all the better. But I suspect both parties will move these things online, just given the situation.
Okay, I was going to follow up, but Lincoln, we need to jet out. So tell us really briefly what you think. Will the Republicans hold it or no?
The Democrats to do it online in a virtual way. The Republicans, I hope, do it online, because I don't want to see, I may not like that party, I may not vote for them, I don't want to see their activists dying with this disease, and that's what will happen. But the other question is, would Donald Trump soon, which he wants to, get on the road and do this? And if he does that, there won't be masks and there won't be social distancing. And sadly, there will be deaths. And partisanship aside, that's really sad and unfortunate.
Right, I think I agree with that completely. Gentlemen, thank you so much. That's all the time we have. Thank you all for being here with me. I'm Dr. Christina Greer. You've been watching the election show on MNN. We've had Matt McDermott, who's a communication strategist and vice president of Whitman Insight Strategies, and also political analyst and professor of political science at Columbia University, Lincoln Mitchell. Thank you all so much. Stay safe.